completed. All right, good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to another episode of the Engineering Leaders podcast series, where we are actually bringing together engineering leaders from various fields to pick their brains and their experiences on how a young aspiring engineer can succeed and have an exciting career. So today we have Michael on the podcast. So Michael started his passion for technology and engineering when he was around computers and technology at a very young age, where his dad actually bought him a TRS-80 when he was 6 or 7 years old. So living in Northern California, he will often meet technologists who were from Silicon Valley, who would just go there for a holiday, where his interactions with them actually inspired that burning passion for technology and, eventually Michael having a career in technology. So Michael has since held numerous tech leadership positions in reputable companies such as WebLogic, Yahoo, and now as a GM for startups at APEC in Microsoft, working with high-performing teams to help startups scale, grow, and thrive. So without further ado, let's welcome Michael here on this show. We're really excited to have you here
Thank
today.
you. It's great to be here. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah,
And
cool.
thanks. Like, you probably read about me, and I'm like, oh, did I say stuff like that? Like, that's good. It's funny to hear about yourself, right? I'm always pretty bad about hearing or watching myself, but I'm excited to be here, and I think it'll be interesting to have this discussion with you. Yeah.
All right, cool. Michael, same to you, and very excited to hear about your story, and just really understanding the journey that you took to get to where you are, and some of the experiences and lessons that you have learned. So, perhaps maybe you want to introduce the audience a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in the field of technology.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I've been in the industry for a long time. I've done things like, tech support is probably the first thing that I kind of called home, like tech support. I was in college and worked tech support at a big online. I say it was actually dial-up modems and stuff like that. It's a company that got bought by LexisNexis, was the big legal thing. And then I started, what I actually worked on a help desk at night, and they would hand us like scripts that were broken to work on, and we could kind of work on the script and test it since it wasn't production code. And that's where I started like, ooh, this tech thing's fun, coding's fun. But then I also quickly learned that I wasn't a good coder. And then I think I sat off from that moment on, like a different career path, not immediately, but I realized that I would never make a good day-to-day engineer. And I think some of that is like, I just didn't want to be on the keyboard all day long, even though maybe some people really enjoy that. I like people, and I like complexity, and I like management. So I kind of like, how do I do all these things but stay in the tech world? And I think the trajectory was really startups for one thing, because you get to do lots of different things at startups. And then the second thing was things that related to sales or marketing started to get more interesting to me. So that's kind of where I got kicked off. But I call myself jokingly like a deep generalist, because I do lots of different things, and I'm sure I'm not a great specialist, but I've always kind of said, hey, I want to stay at the intersection of like people and product and tech, and that could be at a startup, at a big company. It could be sales, it could be marketing, it could be product management. I'm okay as long as I'm always people, product, tech. Something will be okay, and that's just largely what I've done all my life. It's just with different brands, different companies, and startups. But that's where I've stayed, and I also kind of moved into the capital world, because that's still people, product, tech as well, just the capital side of it. So I enjoy it all. I love this region. I've been in Singapore for about 15 years. I've been in Asia about 23, 24 years. Yeah, so Asia is my base. People, product, tech is what I care about, and that's why I am where I am today.
Oh, that's really interesting, and it's very interesting to hear that you've been in Asia for quite a prolonged period. But I mean, I'm just curious, what actually draws you to Asia, and what's very different working in Asia as opposed to maybe somewhere in the West.
Yeah, I think I had a very, like, early on in my, at 17 or 18, I went to India on a missionary trip with the church I was with when I was young. And I passed through, I think, Hong Kong going in and Singapore coming out. And then what's funny is now I've lived in both Hong Kong and Singapore, but I never lived in India. But I just kind of like caught an Asian, I would say I caught a travel bug, if you want to know the truth, because I went to Europe too. And the other reason I picked tech, because I think it's pretty mobile. And you could travel around with these positions as well. I knew moving around was in my future, but I wouldn't say I picked a target. It was kind of handed to me, if you want to know the truth. So when I was at BEA Systems, which bought the startup I was at, I just said, hey, I want to go overseas. I'm really excited to like work in other places, but I don't know where I'm going to go. But do you guys have anything for me? And my boss at the time, who's the CTO, said, let me just, now that we've been acquired, let's figure it out. Maybe there's some optionality, but it might take a few months for me to get you some options. I think it took him like 6 months, and he came back. And I joke with this all the time. He said, hey, I got two cities for you can move to. They both start with an H. And of course, I knew one was Hong Kong because I'm like Asia, Hong Kong, and I knew BEA had their headquarters in Hong Kong. For the life of me, I was like, H, what's the other H? Because I'm assuming it was Europe, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And it turned out it was High Wycombe, which is a suburb of London. And he was like, what are you interested in? And I just went, nah, not Europe. It's too much like the States. Let me go Asia way. And I think honestly, within like the first weekend of Hong Kong, I think I landed on a Thursday. I'm in a service apartment. I'm jet lagged, but I'd been around the region before. I just knew by like Sunday, like I gotta live here. I gotta stay here. And then I think what amplified it was just you know, I was flying all the time. I was in every Asian thing working on deals. I'm like, man, all these countries are interesting, and this. So I just knew that I wouldn't go back to the States. And every year I kind of had this decision point. Maybe I need to, but then 3 years turned into 4 years. 4 years turned into 5. And then the decision point was another Asia country rather than back to America. And I just keep doing that. But now it's been 15 years just in Singapore. Yeah, I'm not going back. Do I move around in Asia again? Potentially, but I'm not going back. I like the newness of it. I like the cultural differences. I like the tech. I just see no reason to kind of change now. And both Europe and America are amazing places. They're just not as interesting to me when it comes to like my day-to-day life, right? And I love the tech scene in Southeast Asia. So those have been kind of my North Stars, like Asia, but the tech scene in Southeast Asia, I feel like I know everybody. It's a good place for me to stay. So yeah, I'm kind of hooked on it, but it's worked for me. Luckily, it's worked for me where I can kind of be in tech, be in the region, but also be successful from a career and even family. It's just worked. And I feel very fortunate and lucky because I know it doesn't always work like this, but for me, it has.
Wow, sounds like you had really a ton of adventure, moving from the States and now, Asia and even the regional part of Asia as well. And, but, I just noticed that you also mentioned that you actually worked with a lot of startups. Throughout your whole career, you've been around startups and you have actually watched, a lot of them grow into successful business. So, I'm just curious as to what actually inspired you to venture into this space, particularly in the startups, helping startups to grow, eventually thrive and even, succeed in what they do.
Yeah, I think it's probably just like timing, serendipity. I think so I got a job. I was living in Thailand and got a job with Yahoo, and I moved into Singapore to work for Yahoo. And this might surprise people, but at this time, Yahoo was still pretty important in the region. Everybody used mail and messenger and even some of our data. And one of the duality to the role I had was like developer evangelism. But the only people we would really go evangelize would be startups, right? Even though at the time, maybe the scene wasn't big. And I ended up running into Ming Wang, who Hackerspace, people remember the original Hackerspace in Singapore. And then JFDI, right? When JFDI started. So, doing some history lessons here. It was the Joyful Frog something incubator, right? But it actually stands for something else, but I'll let people figure out what the JFDI means. It's kind of a joke. But so I just naturally fell into like the scene. I wouldn't say I was like, I'm going to do startups. Just my Yahoo job had me talking to these people, sponsoring conferences, and you had to like it. So this is the early days of E27, JFDI, Hackerspace, Block 71s just coming into existence. Nothing like you see, no venture funds apart from the maybe global ones and a few tiny regional ones. This predates open space. I think Jungle Ventures is just kicking off at the time. So I think I just got fortunate. I'm kind of there at the beginning because I think that's the beginning for the Singapore scene, and just decided to kind of like stay in it, but maybe in a different way than most people, where you say like I'm going to do a startup. I wasn't at a startup, but I'm like I want to help startups. So I'm like, hey, can I be a mentor at JFDI? Can I, help with hackerspace? I just stayed there with it. And then when I got my permanent residency and I was at Yahoo, I'm like, hey, now I don't need a work permit to stay here because we need that as foreigners. I'm going to go work for a startup, and that's when I went and did Spool. And then I just kind of oscillated between I'll do a startup, I'll do some corporate work, and maybe that's because, in all fairness, I haven't been super successful in a startup that's, let's say, exited, where you might get a windfall of some sorts. I've just been in them. And then I kind of said, let me do some bigger ones. And that was like Hook. So I think, those are my stripes. I might as well wear them. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. And I think as the scene has grown and matured, it's just created new opportunities, bigger startups, more venture funds, corporates that are looking at startups. It's all here, right? And it's all kind of evolved. And you got to hand it to Singapore in some sense for really fostering this ecosystem, and not only just keeping it going, learning how to keep navigating its evolution, right? So I feel really lucky because I don't think, outside of India, China, and a few places, there's no more vibrant, diverse startup scene, I think, globally than the Southeast Asian one. So I think it's also kind of lucky that I'm there, and I'm a big Singapore fan. Everybody knows me. I think of the little red dot as the dot in the center of this whole ecosystem. Like it exists around Singapore, and that's no offense to Indonesia or Vietnam, their ecosystems, but it's all kind of benefited from the strength of Singapore going all in and making it good for venture capital, good for family office, good for incorporation. That's been a benefit to Southeast Asia, right? And a lot of those ecosystems are falling in, learning from that and using it. So yeah, I think it's more luck and timing than anything, but at the same time, I saw it for what it was, something amazing. Let me just stay with it. And that's where I've been. And I haven't moved since, and I'm just here. And I don't imagine ever not being in that scene.
Right. Wow. So
Yeah, history lesson there. I don't know how far back people go, but I figure it's always good to drop some history lessons.
yeah. But wow, that means you've really been around during the time when the internet was still growing and has matured to the state at where it is now. So so I guess wow, it's been quite a long but illustrious history of the internet as well. Yeah, so I just because you have been working with startups for so long, and I believe you had some great experiences working with some of them. What were some of the greatest fulfillments you had while actually working with these small companies to actually see them grow, and you as a third person really helping them to scale?
Yeah, I think like I'm always careful to say that like I'm the difference in any of these things, but I think when it's whether I was at the VC fund and I'm funding them and I'm trying to work with them or I mentor them, I've started this thing where I'm doing mentoring a couple days, like a couple hours a week over video conference for anybody in Southeast Asia, which I kicked into gear last week. And like what I keep realizing, and I'll probably sound like a contrarian here or a little bit of an old person curmudgeon. This isn't going to work for everybody, right? And I think in our hustle culture, kind of, everything's on Instagram, everything's out there. It sometimes we think that there's only one path, right? Like you get funded, you do well, you announce your rounds, you have an exit. But we all know that's actually not the truth, right? That a lot of things don't make it. Not everybody fundraises, not everybody needs to fundraise. People have mental health issues along the way of these journeys. I think what I've been learning and what I feel actually really good about, and I've noticed this thread throughout my life, I'm a pretty candid person. I probably overshare, overtalk, kind of tell it like it is. And in the corporate world, I kind of get in trouble for that sometimes. But when it comes to the startups and the coaching and speaking to people, I try to take the voice of realism, where, hey, I'm a startup, I'm running out of money, I can't raise funds. What do I do? it's okay to stop. It's okay to like properly wind the company down, pay people severances, pay the fees to strike off your company, take a break, breathe, not kill yourself mentally with I'm such a failure, and realize that's actually real life. But what these people might not be hearing is that it's okay to stop. It's okay to like give up. And I've had some startups where like, hey, at what point do I give up? Work backwards. How much money do you have left for your severance? How much money do you have left to your strike off? Not a comfortable conversation. It's not a fun one, but it is real. But we don't hear about this, right? You don't see an article coming out a day of, hey, the startup that failed and what they had to do to wind their company down. But the reality is it is happening every day. We only hear about the other stuff. So, and I see this with everything from like coaching people on realisms for fundraising, coaching people on, hey, I hired this CTO and he's toxic but he's kind of good, but he's toxic and we've been struggling for months. You got to get rid of him. Oh, but he's whatever. No, you got to get rid of him because it's like cancer. We know if you don't cut it out, it's going to keep growing. So I realized that in the coaching and then even the startups, like I wanted to take the really giving people, I didn't even call it advice, be my feeling or my opinion, because it's really just my opinion on the truth of some things. And hope that the shining a light on the truth for them and having that discussion aids them in whatever they need to deal with, whether it's themselves, an employee, a funding round, whatever, like hopefully helping people realize that there's the other side of everything. And if I can help them discuss it and give them some advice and feel better about it, then mission accomplished. Because we know what you're reading and what you're hearing in the zeitgeist is not those things. And I think it takes the mentoring or the coaching, even for myself, to be able to talk about those things and help people work through them, just like I've done in my own life. And I think that's kind of the banner I'm carrying around these days versus the, raise fund. Like, come on, let's talk about the other stuff. You have a family to raise. How are you doing that and running your startup? Who's paying the price? Is it your kids? Let's talk about those things because that's real life. And I'm trying to bring real life into the thing, but for purposes of helping people on their own path.
I see. Oh, no, I believe actually because I do have friends who are also, running startups, and actually the endeavor of actually running an entrepreneurship, having to create the product on their own,
Very
settle
hard.
accounts, it's really a tough journey.
Yeah.
I can understand. But I was just curious because I believe you also seen your fair share of startups that actually, continue to grow and thrive and eventually became successful. So in your opinion, what actually differentiates the ones that, ends up being really successful and the ones
Everybody
that
asks this, and I can only give you from my vantage point what I've seen and what I think about. A couple of them I've noticed actually surprisingly, even in my own investment portfolio for both Angel and from Seed Plus, a lot of people talk about you need co-founders, you need a couple people. Surprisingly, what I've noticed is a lot of the single co-founders are doing really well. um, and I think it's because there's just probably less drama and less politics, right? It doesn't mean it's easy or better. I'm just saying I've noticed a lot of times we kind of give the impression that you need to have multiple co-founders to succeed. But what I see is actually the opposite. And doesn't mean you can't succeed as multiple, but I've also noticed the single co-founders are doing just fine. And I think that's okay. The other thing I notice is it's just a marathon and not a sprint. And you can kind of see the ones that are like, let's grow fast, let's go crazy. We have them in, I'm not going to mention names, but you know which ones are in the region that are on the failure side for like go quick and what's happened with them. Now, maybe that wasn't the reason they folded, but it could be. I don't know. But all the other ones I see, it's taken them years to get where they are. And it's okay, right? Like, it doesn't happen as fast as you think, is what I'm saying. So we always like it's a marathon and not a sprint. I think it's true. I think, and I think this comes from Andy Jassy. There's no compression algorithm for time. You need the experience, you need the time to build something. Doesn't mean move fast. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have velocity, but it doesn't mean suddenly you're going to be successful in 2 years either. And you shouldn't feel bad if you're not. I think the other thing I see is that these people really had a hankering for building a business, right? And I say that maybe every startup says that, but you see a lot of these like idea factory type of things or founder dating things. And again, I'm not saying whether they're good or bad, but what I notice in the ones that are successful, that's not the formation, right? The formation was, I have some experience. I really see this business problem. I'm going to really drill on it and I'm going to stick with it. Doesn't mean they don't pivot. Doesn't mean that, but they have the foresight to really keep focusing on a big problem, and the market keeps meeting them on that. Those are some of the things I see. The other stuff I see is just they get really good at building a culture. And I would say, I'm not here to say what the culture is, but that they're very purposeful about the kind of culture they want to be, whether it's the way they conduct themselves in meetings, whether they're remote or not remote. They don't just let something happen by chance and then try to figure it out. They're very purposeful. And hey, we're a remote company first, so let's build like that. We're a hybrid company, let's build like that. We're a, don't have a lot of senior executives. We have some decision makers with local empowerment kind of company. Let's build like that. So it's not to say that I'm giving someone the answer for what's worked and how you should do it. But what I notice is how purposeful people are and what they're trying to do. And then I think that sense of business acumen, strategy with purpose allows them to stay in the marathon, because it is a marathon. And if you don't have some of those things, it might feel like a sprint and you tire out and you fall down on the pavement. That's where I see the difference. Now, everybody's journey is different, but those are some of the qualities that stay true to me when I look at something from 10 years ago to now. And I'll give you a simple example because I really love this guy in the ecosystem, but he's moved. So if everybody knows who Vicky is, right? Vicky's the Korean, started as a Korean online drama thing with crowdsourced subtitling, if everybody remembers. And it was based in Singapore, probably one of the larger rounds for a company like that. And then they sold to Rakuten. And it was a very good exit in the region. And they still have a big Singapore office, I believe. So Razmig was the CEO. And the thing I really loved about Razmig is, one, you wouldn't see him in the scene very much. He was working. And then I remember him one time coming to like an event kind of late and being at the event because he's like, "Hi, I'm Razmig Vicky." And someone said, like, "Razmig, we don't see you at these events much." He goes, "Yeah, I'm either working or I'm home with my family." Like, if I'm at an event, nothing's getting done. And he wasn't like slandering events or saying something bad about the scene, but he's basically saying, if you care more about being in the scene, something's paying the cost. Either the actual time you spend on your business or time you spend with your loved ones or your own quality time. You really can't do all three things well. So I love that sense of purpose and focus and honesty. He's one of those really candid people that like, hey, I work a lot of hours, and then when I'm done, I'm kind of going to go home with my wife and kids rather than go hang in an event and hold a cocktail in my hand. And I tell a lot of people, like, go to your events, get a network, or learn how to just do personal networking. But if you think you're going to get your idea or build your business at that event, you're not, right? It's going to come through the hard yards, and you need to do the hard yards with yourself and your team. So I think that's another thing I've noticed is just there's the culture or the hype of being in the scene versus building a business, right? And the people that are successful, you'll generally find are building the business, and you don't see them around the scene that much.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, some of the experience that you have faced. And, I believe, a lot of people would see that this is true. Things like, people like Elon Musk, working so long hours on their.
Yeah, I think that's the other side of the spectrum. I don't know if I like put a stamp of approval on that. I think, but I get your point. It's just kind of like I'm building, and I have to build, and I don't have time for this. And I think, in this kind of like culture of like putting everything on social media and show like there's just a little bit too much of that versus just building and then realizing that you also need time for yourself. And then you just get back to that marathon example, you need to survive the race, right? So you have to be kind of purposeful about how you personally survive the race.
All right. Cool. And thanks so much for your insights. And I believe the audiences will also be very curious to know you as a person and your journey to where you are right now. So, when you were a junior engineer, right? Moving, to various roles, as a sales engineer and eventually as a manager, and now at your current position, what were some of the important activities and steps and efforts that you have put in along the way to advance in your career to where you are right now?
Yeah, it's always hard for me to answer this because I have to look back sometimes and try to figure out myself how I got here. But I think some of the things I've learned along the way that I think are important that have helped me, which is um, even your own career is a marathon, right? And it's largely based on your historicals plus your aptitude plus where you're at today all gets kind of mixed together. But I think like when you're young, you don't realize that, right? You're just kind of, like I can't recall a lot of my 30s, even though I was busy but it wasn't on social media like it is today. And I probably didn't take a lot of pictures, but I knew things were going on. But what I realized in looking back is there's a couple things that I'm much more conscious of today that I kind of give advice to people about. One is just this whole notion of karma. And I don't mean this from a spiritual sense, but more from like what goes around comes around, right? And um, in my career, what's really fascinating to me is maybe not every intersection at each job, but there's a kind of connective tissue for my career where somebody that I dealt with maybe even a decade ago is slightly involved with where I am today because they introduced me to somebody or they were a referral for me, or I'm like, hey, did you know that guy? He does. Well, I'll talk to him for you. And the reason I bring this up, because in my early years, I didn't understand this concept enough to realize that I should stop being a jerk on my way to trying to win because I'm burning my network or my people. Um, Fortunately, I had people kind of take me aside and explain this to me, but I also saw it firsthand when I needed work and I could call somebody and they said, hey, I'll get you an interview here, get on the plane. And it worked. And then I always like that's because I was cool to that guy. And then I have had other jobs where people call me and they say, and I know who they are, and they say, "Hey, I got this other thing I'm doing. Would you like to hear about it?" And that's how I got the Seed Plus, for an example. So the moral of the story is, just don't burn your bridges. You need to realize that these people around you, from your subordinates to your coworkers to your friends, they're in this network of yours, and you need to like take care of the network, or it won't take care of you, right? And I think that's a really important thing. I think second thing is to realize that um, it's okay not to be a specialist, but it's also okay to be one if that's what you want. But I guess my point is you need to kind of keep crafting the fact that you need to keep learning, you need to keep acquiring knowledge, and you need to keep getting better at your craft, whatever your craft is. It's a constantly moving target. And then in doing that, then you need to figure out how do you do that? Like, how do you get better at your craft? Is it training? Is it mentors? Is it whatever you need to do? But you need to be thinking about it because I liken this to, I'm kind of a gym junkie, not because I'm big or anything, because I know that exercise is important to my mind and my health, and I like the gym. It's a solo. It's almost like meditation for me. Um, but I know like if I go on holiday for like 4 weeks and I'm traveling and I'm not in the gym, I feel like crap. Like it goes quick, right? Like you lose the even the amount of weight you're lifting and everything quite fast, right? Because you're not continually doing it. So it needs repetition. It needs, perseverance. You got to get in there and do it. It's a habit. I reckon the career is very similar to that. If you're not kind of exercising your capabilities, whether it's in the job or not, you will lose these capabilities. So I think it's important for people to think about how do they keep getting knowledge, and maybe it's shifting the types of job they do. Maybe it's being a mentor to other people. Maybe it's moonlighting in a startup. Whatever it is, you just need to think about it because if you kind of think, oh, I got this job, I'm okay now. Let me just work hard and play. You'll wake up one day and realize, hey, I'm not moving through the org or I'm not doing something. So you got to think about those things. And then lastly, I would say really figure out how you manage time. And I know that one sounds really silly, but I know as I've gotten older, I suddenly looked back and said, wow, I had so much time for X or Y, and I didn't really manage my time. And what I mean by that is just some sort of like, habits that you form for how do you do productive things? How do you focus? How do you take notes? How do you work on ideas so that you can kind of stretch your brain? Because again, if you're just kind of going through the motions, these things are not going to happen naturally. You need to think about them. And then I think if people do that, you'll realize that you'll just kind of have a natural openness to progression and learning, and your coworkers and your leaders will see this because you kind of live that way, and you'll get naturally pulled into possibly bigger and bigger things if that's what you want. But I just think you got to have some conscientious to that. It's not going to happen automatically, and it's not like someone's going to do that for you. You got to do that work yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for the insights over there. It must been a lot of experiences that have brought you those, revelations. And because you have been in the industry for a long period of time, and I believe there was ups and downs. And I saw your interviews. You mentioned that previously you really had a lot of rejections before. Whether in your life or your career as well. So I believe but you also overcome these challenges and crises to be where you are right now. So, I'm just curious as to, were there some, or if you could recall maybe one or two crises that actually you experienced that really stood out to you and you grew a lot from?
Yeah, I think the funny thing is like a lot of the things that have really grounded me in some level of, let's say, perseverance is anytime I've stepped out or before my tech journeys and trying to be like a normal, maybe do other jobs. But I I think, I had like a sojourn, as I call it, or my midlife crisis. I'm pretty open about this, where I was in Hong Kong. I'd been there for like 5 or 6 years, working a lot of hours, traveling a lot. And I kind of hit the end of like, I don't want to do what I do anymore. And I just quit. I outright quit, which is probably pretty silly from a financial perspective, but whatever. I outright quit. I moved myself to Thailand. I lived very cheaply, and I ended up getting involved in the food and beverage industry, and I did terrible at it. And I lost a lot of money and time. But but it was also the service industry, and it really taught me a lot about service. And one thing I like to think about that I tell people is like servant leadership is like I think the term people use, and I always surprise people with this. When someone says like, and even it's one of my employees, like, I'm trying to do this, and it's like, what can I do to help you with that? Or I'm at your disposal to help you with that problem. People are like, why would you answer that way? Because that's the best thing I can tell you. I don't have the answer for you, but I'm happy to help. And I think this notion of servant leadership, you can read a lot of documents on it, is interesting because as leaders, there's some people that take the path like, I'm your leader, and it's kind of this egotistical framework versus the, yeah, I'm your leader. That's my position, and I have a lot of responsibility in it. But I'm also here to help you do better at what you do. And I think the service industry taught me a lot about that. And then I think also the working with like non-technical people and normal problems taught me a lot about process and how to get things done and how to be really self-reliant. So I think, yeah, these little things have just helped me to stick with something, or if I can't stick with it, be willing to like not be afraid to change, knowing that I might have to learn something again. But I always tell people if like I don't think I crafted this. I think it's I'm there and I'm open and I'm probably lucky and I've probably worked harder in the last decade or two to not burn bridges, that it's all kind of like coming together a little bit. Um, but like what you said earlier, and I always tell people when I'm talking to people, the startup journey is super, super hard. And I as an outsider always tell people, I'm talking to you because I want to help, but I'm probably not even doing what you're doing, and I shouldn't be acting like I know how to help you. I can just act like I can listen and give you some advice because what you're doing is harder than what I'm doing. And I always try to like help people with that because I think you're right. It is super hard. And all you can do is kind of string together experiences and outcomes and try to better what you're doing. But for me, it's just I have to keep remembering to be open, not be the first one to talk, and learn from things and try to be in service to others and then that'll allow me to be successful in whatever role that I do.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing your vulnerable stories. I must have imagined that it's back then was a very difficult period for you, but you came out much stronger, and that's something that we found all very inspiring.
Yeah,
So
battle scars are good. Like it helps, right? And I
yeah.
think you just have to go through them to get better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes the best lessons are always learned from the biggest of pains, right? Yeah, so Michael, as someone with many years of experience in the engineering space, working with and together with high performing engineering and sales team, you must have a lot of experience actually mentoring and guiding younger engineers or maybe younger sales engineer in their careers. So now that we are actually facing a recession, especially with a lot of big tech layoffs, as a leader yourself, do you have any advice for young engineers who not only survive the recession or coming recession, but to thrive and even promote during this period?
Yeah, so I think even this period aside, I think one of the, and I don't know who wrote this, you'd have to look it up. There's always a period of learning or earning is the way I like to think about it. And I think you kind of got to realize that in your life you're going to vacillate between learning and earning, and then if you're really lucky you might get both, you're learning and earning, and then other times you're like, I'm purely earning and I'm not growing, or I'm really growing but I'm not earning. I think it's a good framework to have in all your mind as a young person, because you got to kind of realize that this is going to take years or decades to probably get to where you want, either whether it's financially or mentally or skill wise, but you need to be kind of purposeful around like what you're trying to do. I actually don't think it's Armageddon right now. I think big tech is doing what they do, and a lot of other large entities around what I think of as kind of right sizing post COVID. And I think if you really frame it up in that light, it doesn't look so ridiculous, because it was like, who could have predicted COVID? Anybody? And would anybody have even predicted how it kind of played out? No. So everybody just had to evolve to meet whatever was going on with COVID, mass rules and changes. And then everybody's business kind of recalibrated around this thing that was taking a while. And then suddenly this thing's mostly gone, but yet we thought we were going to look the same and now we're not. I think that's what's going on, right? And then I think you have to add into the interest rate environment. We've been living in a very almost free money environment, and it's changed. And my so-called prediction is we're never going back to free money to the level we did. And like this is, I don't like the new normal, but this is more looks like what economics will look like for a while. Then you add in inflation, these other things. But I think for people young in their career, you're really mobile, right? Now, maybe if you have families or kids, you're less mobile. But what I tell people from like the interns I had at AWS, or even my own kid, is like, you don't have to stay where you are, right? Like, maybe there's some family reason that you do, but you could kind of, if you have no spouse, and maybe the spouse goes with you, but just trying to make it simple. If you're able to move around, by all means, explore where you could go, right? Because that could help you with the learning phase and earning and experience, rather than saying, oh, I'm stuck here and things are bad. But I don't think they're quite as bad as people let on, but I should say I'm very empathetic to people that lose their job, because that's very, very hard. But there are still lots of people hiring. And one of the things, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see that I'm always doing the cool gig alert, cool gigs alert. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't have another job to post. Or I think I saw 500 startups today with like 16 positions. I saw the Manala incubator from Temasek has like 17 positions. So on one hand, we read all this stuff where people are losing people. On the other hand, I see all these openings. And then lastly, I'll add to it, every time I've been talking to startups for the last year, I always hear, I can't find people. I can't hire. I can't find people. I can't hire. Well, you shouldn't have that problem now. So if there's a bunch of people hiring, like what we're talking about is maybe a transition of sorts, or maybe you've had to change what you kind of think of your career aspirations. But I still think there's lots of opportunity. I think Southeast Asia demographics are still headed the right way for another decade. And yes, it's a painful kind of inflection point, but it's probably a good chance for you to really take stock of what you want to do, where you want to go, and realize that like that ability hasn't changed. And lastly, I'll tell people just stop reading stuff. Like put the news down and just focus on yourself and your own world. And you might find that it's not really as bad as you think. But again, as a youngster, you're on a marathon. Like you're just getting started. If you're out of school right now, you're just getting started. You have a long ways to go. And you're going to see one or two of these events in your life anyway, right? So it's okay, right? And it's okay to maybe feel down about it because you're individually impacted. But I would also say take a deep breath, get back on the horse, and realize there are lots of people hiring. And there's lots, and most of these people are saying, wow, we've never, like, this is great, we can hire now. So I think there's always a good and bad to this. And I think sometimes what happens from a news perspective is you're mostly reading the bad, because that's headlines and that gets readers. But the good is things are still moving. Businesses are still hiring. Companies are still getting funded. Venture capitalists have to write checks. They can't sit on their funds. So despite what everybody says, maybe they're slowing down, maybe they're looking late stage, whatever, but they don't fold up shop during a downturn. They have to keep moving, right? So I think there's always a silver lining. And I think you should try to like focus on yourself and your silver lining and not get too hung up in the overarching narrative.
That's really, really encouraging, and I believe sometimes we tend to jump into conclusions and always see the negative things about the news. Actually, my dad was also telling me sometimes news can be good, but sometimes that sometimes you're reading too much negative news will really drain you, and you don't see the positive things of
Yeah,
it.
and it's a natural thing because what do? You open up the apps and the news, you can see what algorithmically gets bubbled to the surface or what people are talking about. And it's rarely, like it's funny because I read like that Singapore Stomp or something where it's people, is a Singapore site Stomp, I think, where it's all about Singapore and like it's mostly complaints. Like this happened to me, and I'm like, oh, where's the section of like, hey, the good thing happened to me at the hawker stand. Somebody bought my lunch, or you know what I'm saying? Like there's some fun stuff that could be said. And like, and I'll answer this with what I've been trying to do when I've been doing all my like ASEAN startup coaching that I just kind of kicked in and I had this like idea I could write more, I could code on the side, I could moonlight. I have all these things in my mind because I want to be busy. I was like, you know what? I could just take that extra time and push it into mentoring because that actually helps me get better at what I do and it helps startups. And then people have been asking me about like what am I getting out of it? And I say I'm learning a lot. But when people said like what can I do for you? I just say pay it forward. Just really simple. Pay it forward. Buy the next person's coffee. You go mentor somebody. Just do something nice in the ecosystem to somebody else and remember that that was how I would feel good about my time is that you paid it forward. And I think if more people did this like on a daily basis, imagine how more delightful the world would start to look, right?
So well, that's really, really
I know
good.
it's a little bit cheesy, but I just feel like you can do a lot by helping other people and you feel good about yourself while you help other people.
Yeah. And I believe, like what you mentioned previously, about a karma. It's not really in a spiritual sense. You don't really do it because you expect something. But, eventually, once you start doing more for others, the abundance in the world actually grows. And somehow it will also bring it back to you as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a day by day, person by person thing. And I think, everybody like I think the tech nuance truism is true. Like I think there was a Daring Fireball read where the guy said, hey, 10 years ago I'm at Disneyland with my Palm Trio, which had a camera. I had one of those too, which had a camera, and the guy had left his camera, took photos with Palm Trio. And then he showed how like the last 4 or 5 years you would see, oh, iPhone photo looks this much better than last year's photo. But what he did is he took his 10-year-old Palm Trio photos and he had them ready. And when he went to Disneyland, he did all the same photos again with his iPhone 13. And it's just astonishing the difference. He was like, see, it's back to that whole thing. Year to year, you don't see change. But over like a 10-year span, you're like, wow, look at that. And I think you have to think about that in your own life, that you have to realize that like on a day-to-day basis, you don't quite understand the struggle. But if you keep putting on a yearly or more than yearly basis, you'll go, wow, like I've accomplished X or Y, right? And again, I think I only have that hindsight now because I'm getting older and I think about it more. And I wish in my 30s I thought that way. I really do. And I kind of lament, oh, where did those lost years go? But whatever. But I think as a young person, yeah, if you can start thinking now that like you have a lot of years ahead of you, enjoy yourself, but also be purposeful. And I tell everybody, start investing young, start doing these things that you will just be so happy when you're in your 30s and 40s because you go, wow, look at that nest egg, look at my CPF, look at, all this compounding thing works everywhere, right? But yeah, I'm with you. If we could just try to surface the good a little bit more, doesn't mean we don't need to talk about the bad because it's real. I think everybody feel a little bit better about themselves and their surroundings, right?
So and I believe because your role as a you started as a software engineer and eventually move on to sales engineer and working in a more managerial position. So yeah, I'm just really curious as to, because I believe there is also a good number of engineers who might not want to stay in the technical role forever and eventually want to move into product management or maybe the middleman, the front sales line, but still be involved in tech. So do you have any advice for people actually making that transition, and how can they actually grow their career towards that trajectory that
Yeah, I
you
think and I think like if you're a good coder, you should like thank your lucky stars, right? Because that's just an amazing thing that's a talent you'll probably never lose. And I think if you're a good coder, you can use that to do lots of things because you're always a guy who can flip code. But I do think that like you have to be open to, or let's say, like looking around you a little bit and realize that there's other things you could do. But it really depends what you want. Some people just want to be a coder. It's great. If you kind of say, I'm a coder, but I want to learn some other things, I suggest just picking something to get good at, right? And probably with your analytical coding mind, you're pretty good at a learning process because that's what coders do. Pick something, go take a financial course, learn economics, learn finance, learn something. And then now you're kind of like equally lethal because you're like, hey, I know how to run a balance sheet, but I'm also a coder. And then you kind of got to say, like, what else do I want to do with my life? And I think if if you want to be a startup person, that's awesome because you could be technical and learn finance. The reason I always tell people to maybe learn sales or being able to sell is because I think it's a skill set that benefits everybody. And if you're going to do a startup, equally so, because a lot of times meet founders who they're not the ones that can sell, but they need to, because you can't like hire a salesperson from day one and they're learning how to sell for the first time. I always say, like, you should get some sales experience before you try to do that. So I think sales, marketing, business strategies, finance, they're always very clear things you can do. And I've had interns when I worked at AWS who were like in their last couple of years of school, and it was always a similar conversation. They were either these finance slash whatever people. I say, go learn some coding because you take these two things and wire them together. You're super interesting to people. And then the coders, I say, great, go learn some finance, marketing, business strategy. Wow, those two things together, you're amazing. That's always my advice to both sides because I think it's that adding a generalist take to what you do plus opening your mind to different ways of thinking. We don't know what the work world looks like in 10 years. There's no way any of us can know. And with all this automation, AI, it's going to change. But the more you're a generalist and can do different things, the more capable you are to either start your own business, take a different job somewhere, or just manage your career differently. I think that's really important. And I think I worry about this. I have kids because I'm like, man, what is work going to look like for them? Is anything they're learning in school going to imply? Like, I freak out about this stuff because you want them to enter the world and eventually they need to pay their own way, right? And I think, wow, are they learning anything in school that's going to allow them to really have a successful career? I'm dubious if you ask me, because are you learning how to navigate your career, or are you just learning how to like nail some subjects? So I think it's going to be important. I think about this with my own kids, and I don't think I'm even great at it. I'm like, dabble, learn multiple things. It's okay to be good at this, but learn that too. Like, you don't know what you're going to do. You don't know what you're going to love. But if you can be a little bit more of a generalist, you have more options open to you that you can kind of pull on to take you where you want to go. And I think it's the same for a career. And I think it's the same whether whatever you are today, add something to it that's different and be purposeful and objective about it so that you can broaden your optionality in the company you work for, or if you're going to move around, or if you're going to do your own startup. I think it applies to all three.
Okay, well, so, that's a really new insight, because a lot of people would want to specialize in something because you can deep dive, but it's also to understand how we can dimensionalize
And I think my advice there is, if you're going to specialize in deep dive, go really deep. Be the best, because I think if you're kind of as good as everybody else, it's a very competitive workplace. But I think so, I think there's some books written on this, but it's, I forget what it's called, Rome or the Habit one, but it's basically like, if you're going to go deep, go really deep, be the best, and do something somebody else can do. If you can't do that and you're doing surface level specialty, you might as well be a generalist. But I think everybody needs a career. These are some things to think about when you're young, because you want to just create as much optionality as you can, which makes you resilient to change or being able to start a new career or changing thing. That optionality allows for you to make different choices, because we all know that, like, are you going to take your job and work at the same place for 10 years? Probably not. So I'll do this for a couple of years. I'll do that for a couple of years. Like it's different era, and I'm sure we're headed for another different era with what's happening in AI and just remote work and hybrid and the economics changing around the world. I'm sure the next 10 years is going to look very different from what we've been experiencing for the last, say, 10 years.
All right, cool. And my last question to you is, do you have any last advice for our audiences out there, that are really growing and perhaps maybe even struggling at this moment?
Yeah, look, I think if you're struggling, get help, right? And it's like, and maybe the family member isn't the answer. Get a mentor, get somebody, get help. I think if you're struggling, you probably need to talk to people. And I know this in myself, whether it's a friend or a coach, whatever. So I always just want to put that disclaimer. If you're struggling, get some help, talk to people, talk to somebody. For the rest of you, I say, like, and I keep having to tell myself this, just be kinder and be open and be empathetic in your work and in your day to day. And I think everybody benefits from that. And I think that's everything from how you treat people when you get your coffee to whatever you do. It's just, and I use this as a very simple example myself. I know this is a silly one. When I get my car washed, I just tip the guy right when I hand him my car, because I get my car washed at the parking garage. And his whole demeanor is just so different. And it's not that I'm giving him a bunch of money. It's just that I'm recognizing his work kind of ahead of a time. And I also realize not many people are doing it in Singapore, right? And it's not a talk of the culture, but I'm just saying, I know these are not a highly paid job, and I know that it's hard. And I've seen actually the way people talk to him, because I see the same guy when they picked up their car or something. And I just change all that by saying, hey, here's the car keys. And here's, $5 or $10. And I know it sounds kind of silly, but I think I've made his day. But I've also created this kind of relationship with him that, like, I recognize his work. And that's really the only way I can show my appreciation, right? Because, I pay to get it washed to the company. It's not going to him. But you can just see it when someone complains about an order. You see it with, like, it's just, if everybody's a little bit kinder and a little bit more appreciative of whoever's on the other side of this transaction, you will feel better. And I think you'll see the world getting better in your own sphere. And then those people's worlds will also get better. And I just think if everybody does a little bit of that, we'll come out of this COVID thing and our relationships with other humans in a much better position than where I think we are today. And that's my one bit of advice. And I think everybody can live that advice literally from the moment you hear me say this, right? Because just pay it forward in some way, delight somebody, and then that'll pay itself back to you or these other people, even if you don't see it. And I think you'll all feel better about it.
Right. Well, that's really, really great wisdom from you, Michael. And I really resonate with a lot of this, in a lot of areas of my life as well. Really just paying it forward and kindness really makes the world a better place. And
Yeah.
people can
And the
really
tech
benefit.
people could mean like be a coach, be a mentor, be like just you figure out in your own sphere what paying it forward means and just do it. And then it's gonna help. And believe me, you will benefit from it. Maybe you don't see it right away, but you will benefit from it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, as we wrap up this episode of the podcast, my last question is, where can the audience actually best reach you, Michael?
Yeah, so it's great. I think that's a good question because everybody knows Twitter's kind of fallen apart for whatever reason. I'm there less, and I don't think Mastodon's really taken off for me, even though I've been trying. So I tell people find me on LinkedIn, and I actually yes, it's a Microsoft thing, but I don't really say that. I've been on LinkedIn for a long time. I'm actually logged out of Facebook. I don't have Instagram. I don't have TikTok. I like the reality of LinkedIn. It's real people, real profiles. People can message me. So I would say find me on LinkedIn. I think my just like a lot of my handles everywhere are Dream Pipe. But find me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me, and you can message me. And I'm always happy to give people my Calendly links for coffee or mentoring, as long as it's within reason, and people are not pushy about it. I'm always happy to try to do that. And I'll tell people honestly, I've moved everything to Calendly because I can't keep up with trying to book people. So I basically make it a democratic thing. Here's my link. People tell me it fills up fast or something. And yes, it's not me, it's just it is. But that LinkedIn allows me to kind of connect with you, message you there, and then we can figure something out. And then that's the best way for me to kind of interact with people and see what I can do to help. And then lastly, I'll just one small advertisement. If you're interested in Microsoft stuff, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I can give you the links to things or meet with you if you need. But it's kind of an open door policy. If I can help you with my network and my knowledge or Microsoft, it's an open door within time reason. But LinkedIn would probably be the easiest way to get a hold of me. So Michael Smith, Singapore, you'll see me there. Should be easy to spot who I am.
All right, cool. We'll leave his link below the video. And thanks so much, Michael, for being on this show.
Thank you. This is fun. Great
Yeah.
question. And I love these kind of banters, and I love talking about the ecosystem because it's a pretty amazing place to be here right now. So
Yeah, it is. It is. All right. So, hope that whatever Michael has said inspired you, and see you on the next show. Okay, bye.
awesome. Bye.